The e-levy doesn't seem to go away. The government is on a roadshow. Like I said, the IMF came up this week when the finance minister ended up in Tamale, conclusively stating government's position that they will not resort to the IMF. He says Ghana is too proud and that they have homegrown solutions to deal with those problems. I've been having the conversation with Franklin Kujo, Dr. Patrick Opoku-Assuming, who I'll get to. We're having a bit of a technical hitch. We've heard already from Dr. Stephen Ammo, a member of Parliament for Nshia. So you have the floor for another 10 minutes, and then I'll move on.
So,
another 10 minutes.
As I was saying, when you look at the numbers, we look at the economy. You will hear the finance minister, for example, tell you that one of our problems is that, and I think Stika also repeated the point on this set, and you try to intervene, that our tax, rate to GDP is that low, and that we need to increase, how much you tax. You made the point about it being common with rich countries. But again, for me, there is a certain hypocrisy in it, in that argument, which I will speak to later. But the fact remains that Ghana is not doing badly at all compared to, our peers in the region. In fact, Ivory Coast is 13.2. We are around 14%. Nigeria is doing 6.1%.
We are not 14.
We're
12.
14.
Go and check.
We're 14.
12.
The finance minister has been saying 12. But
12.
The OECD countries by the World Bank, it puts us at 14%. 12. But the finance minister has been saying 12.
So they have better data than finance minister.
It's okay.
So
please. It's fine. That's not the argument. The argument is that we are not doing so bad compared to our peers. Because, like I said, Nigeria is doing 6.1%. And if you are doing, 12 or 14%, that's not bad. But the hypocrisy I speak of is the fact that this was the same finance minister,
not giving freebies.
The same finance minister,
they don't do all
who
we are doing that.
I'm sure knew about this. The fact that our tax, to GDP is low, went on the streets and demonstrated against tax implementations and introductions. The same finance minister demonstrated against a government that tried to increase the tax threshold. So today, when he tells you that, there's need to increase the tax rate to GDP, you wonder when he found that relevant to do. Was it just being opposed for opposition's sake or for power's sake that he was doing it? But his understanding of the economics would have told him then that perhaps the government of the day was struggling with some things and needed to increase tax. But he just wanted to oppose those introductions. But that's by the way. Look, the NDC did something. Between 2013 and 2014, when President Mahama was hit with the economic crisis, that came about as a result of the single spine salary structure distorting our revenue, utilization, and cocoa prices plummeting, gold prices went down that year. Then oil prices skyrocketed. So you had these four problems. The single spine salary structure, remember, it led to, in some cases, some workers having their salaries being doubled. But it also threw out of gear our finances. And that was why President Mahama spoke of we all eating the meat and leaving the bones. And so there was a need for us to sit around the table and discuss a way out. The Royal Senchi consensus was called. The MPP boycotted. I will assure them that he may not do that if they call one. The MPP boycotted it. The only person who attended that consensus, workshop was Kwame Mpianim. And up till today, he's still suffering for attending that, workshop. But the point is, at that workshop, Ghana came out with our own homegrown policies. And it was these homegrown policies, and Franklin will agree, that was taken to the IMF for policy credibility. Why? Because at the time, thanks to the opposition and maybe other, commentators, the reputation of the country and government had been so badly battered that international investors did not have confidence when the government said they were going to implement this recovery program. So it needed the backing of the World Bank. And so, if you recall, Ghana didn't get up to 1 billion from even the World Bank. It was less, it was about 940 million Ghana cedis. So it was just for the credibility. So when you hear the finance minister speak today, that we can do it, we are capable of doing it, he's speaking the language President Mahama has been speaking and asking the government to do, because he's been there and he did it. So yes, we can do it. But you see,
e-levy is one of those solutions.
You see, that is why I'm saying that you need engagement. That's why we are saying, let's call a roundtable discussion, a workshop. Let's brainstorm, come up with policies. But you see, at the end of the day, our credibility per the rating agencies has been so battered that we will need somewhat of a grantor. And that is why some people say that going to the IMF is almost inevitable. Even when you adopt your homegrown solutions, remember, Godfred, it was that homegrown, program that the IMF adopted that took us out of the woods, such that by 2016, the EIU, the World Bank, and others started projecting a positive outlook for our economy. Remember that they even projected that by 2017, our GDP was going to grow by 8%. And so when the MPP comes to power, and then 2017 year end, they post a GDP growth of 7%. Plus, it is not entirely their hard work or their, managerial acumen that led to that 7-point-something% growth. Because it was projected based on the work that had been done even before they won power. But yes, you can give them credit for maintaining the programs that they came to meet. Why? Even the IMF program, they extended it because they saw wisdom in it. But then it led to the recovery of the economy. Unfortunately, the MPP, when they inherited that recovery, started behaving like the child whose father has left him so much wealth. And he does not have the discipline to maintain and grow that wealth, but goes to town to party with Kenke and fly in expensive jets. And so gets all the wealth inherited, the recovery inherited, blown away, and then comes back to family members to contribute so that at least he can still live a wealthy life. That is why we are where we are today. It is that behavior that has brought us to where we are today, where they are chasing 6.7 billion. Because if they had maintained the program, which was beginning to, lead to recovery, and if they had pruned their appetite, managed expenditure better, trust me, why, Godfred, this is the luckiest government in our history in terms of resources. In terms of resources, they have had more resources than any other government in our history. Look, I'll just share with you what Osafo Marfo said.
Quickly, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, quickly. The former finance minister and then senior minister, when he was appointed in 2017, he said, "We are extremely heavily indebted, but not poor. The economy is fundamentally very strong. It is the management that has been a problem." When he said we were heavily indebted, our debt was about 122 billion. Our revenue was not as much as they have now. In fact, the revenue now has more than tripled the revenue we had at the time when he said this. But today, our debt is over 300 billion. Despite the huge windfalls that they have had. So he said that the economy was fundamentally strong when they took over. that the problem was with the management. So if you took over a fundamentally strong economy and you profess to have better management, and God being so good, you have more resources than the poor manager, how come that today unemployment has worsened, the debt situation has worsened, the exchange rate has worsened? How come? What did you do with your better skills and with your better resources?
Your point, we'll leave that question for another time. Let me talk to Dr. Patrick Opoku, assuming. Hopefully you'll come in, don't worry.
We've given him twice my time.
No, I did
just
not.
time is here. Check.
You haven't given
Can
him
you
that
let
time.
us have the
He
proper
started
flow?
9.46.
And ended
Check.
at 58.
Check.
Yes, I know. And has now finished at 13. So put the time together.
Hey,
Dr. Patrick Opoku.
check mine.
Dr. Patrick Opoku, assuming, good morning.
Good morning and good morning to viewers.
Aha. I think the connection is much better now. So I'm sure you've listened to the entire conversation, and I come to you from the academic side. I said I spoke to a colleague of yours from the University of Ghana Business School who said he finds that there's nothing wrong with the e-levy, but perhaps the government can shape it better to get what they want. We've also heard the finance minister say, look, we don't need the IMF to be able to do this. We can navigate this path on our own. From where you sit, are you convinced that this is the panacea to our problems?
Thank you. So the short answer for me will be no. But I think let's put everything in a little bit of context.
Okay.
We all know that the government needs to raise a lot more revenue. And this issue about expanding our tax bracket has been with us for a long time. I've always applauded the current government for how it has approached that problem. And that is the digitization measures that we've been doing for the past 5 years. So in terms of the broad strategy, the medium to long-term strategy, that will be effective for broadening the tax base. I think that's what we've been doing for a while. We all know it will be medium term. So in the short term, the government needs to find other ways of raising more revenue while we get that to bear fruit. And you see that over the years, the government has tried one or two measures. So we had the luxury vehicle tax. Then there was a point where they tried to raise the tax rate at the upper end. It appears that the government has been a little bit too sensitive to some specific interest groups. And then even though those ideas were fundamentally sound in terms of raising more revenue, they were rolled back. Then fast forward, we have COVID, and then COVID has already changed the picture a little bit because it means that the government has not been able to raise as much revenue. And then there's also been COVID-induced spending. That has actually worsened our government finances. So it's obvious that in the midst of all of this, we need to find more clever ways of expanding the tax bracket while we wait for the medium-term measures to break in the revenue we expect. But, for me, I think the e-levy, a number of measures have been proposed. Even in the last budget, there were several measures. For me, the e-levy is not one of the soundest ones that we could use. Perhaps we could fall on some of the other things that were contained in the budget. So first of all, you have to wonder why the government appear to be dilly-dallying in terms of rolling back the benchmark values. Again, it appears that it's being too sensitive to an arguably very powerful a very powerful lobby, which is the GUTA. Then you also have to think about the exemptions. Mm-hmm. The exemptions that has been discussed. And by the way, when we were in the last IMF program, the exemptions was a topic for discussion. And yet we didn't take any action. To be fair, the current government has tried to bring in a bill. I think initially brought in something and it was taken back. But now in the current budget again, it was promised that the exemptions bill will be brought back. So I think if you focus on the exemptions and you're able to break in a lot more, because in 2019, the president spoke and said that at that point, the exemptions alone were costing the economy over $2.4 billion. Even if it is still the same, and we're able to pass an exemptions bill that allow us to even rake in half of that amount. That would be more than we need, or more than we are going to collect with the e-levy. So there's that part. Then there's also the property taxes that was mentioned. And we know that, for me, property taxes is one of the easier ones that we should be collecting, especially now that we've done digitizing properties and their locations.
But it seems to be the hardest one for the government to pass. It rarely gets discussed.
Which is something I struggle to understand. The government is burning so much political capital arguing on why we need it. And yet, as far as I'm concerned, the other measures that they themselves mentioned, they look like it will be much more easier to pass, and they will face relatively lower resistance. And frankly, if you compare the e-levy, what is potential impact in terms of our other development objectives, those other measures don't have those inconsistency issues, because we've been trying to make the economy cash-light, and we've been trying to promote financial inclusion. And you notice that participation in the mobile money market is one of the quickest means that we've managed to bring a lot more people into participation into the financial sector. So for me, the e-levy as it stands, at the moment it's being made to look like the e-levy will be the single bullet solution to our problems, which we all know that it isn't. In any case, the other things that are in the budget, they will break in probably more revenue from more revenue than the e-levy, without the other repercussions, the discussion about the e-levy, whether it's really people opposing it. I think the arguments that have been made that the e-levy will help us bring more people of the informal sector into the tax bracket, I don't think, for me, it doesn't hold much water. If it's true, there may be some people who are doing base business who are not in the tax bracket that the e-levy will bring in, but it also comes at the expense of double or multiple taxing people who are already paying their due. So in terms of bringing the informal sector into the tax paying bracket, I don't think the e-levy is necessarily the best way to go. Then there's been a lot of discussion about what we should do with the expenditure side. Mm-hmm. And the finance ministry has announced that there will be 20% cut in expenditure. And over the week, the deputy finance minister has been explaining what sort of things will be cut. For me, I look at how this has been done, and again, it doesn't look like that's going to be the solution to that problem. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be cutting expenditure, but we read the budget late November. And then we were convinced that we've gone through all the processes and all these expenditure items were needed. Suddenly, we get downgraded by a rating agency, and then we announce apparently a knee-jerk reaction to cut expenditures by 20%. Now, if you look at the items the bigger items in our expenditure bracket, at the moment, number one is the interest payment, and we cannot cut our interest payment. We have to settle our interest obligations. Number two is compensation, and the government was not going to renege on its paying its workers. That's not going to happen. Then the other items left, we have capital expenditure, and then consumption of goods and services. So frankly, if you say you are going to cut 20%, it looks like the things that will help the economy grow in the medium to long term is what you are going to cut. And then you have to question why that would be an effective strategy. We all understand that the government revenue, the government expenditures need to be rationalized a little bit, but I think it would be more helpful to give us a little bit more detail about specific things that we feel that at the moment we can cut, and that will help us. Now, on the question about whether it's e-levy or the IMF, I mean, if you look at the indicators, some of the indicators we currently have, they are not that different from the last time we went to the IMF. if you look at the tax to GDP, the debt to GDP, if you look at the size of the deficit, if you look at the fraction of our revenue that we use to service the debt, all of them are similar or sometimes worse than the conditions that took us to the IMF. Obviously, for political reasons, the government is unlikely, at least in the short term, to go to the IMF. But we also know what will happen when we go to the IMF. We are going to be asked to raise more revenue, and we are going to ask to be tighten our belts on the expenditure side. So the question is, without going to the IMF, whether the government is committed to doing those things that need to be done. You know, you have to remember that before we went to the IMF, before we went to the last IMF program, you know, there was some discussion in the months or so before, and then we were told that we are not going to the IMF. Eventually we did. So for me, unless the government, you know, goes back and the finance minister goes back and show us specific, credible, and believable strategies that we can all believe in, that when we do this, it will solve our debt challenges and it will solve our growth challenges and our public finances, then it appears that, you know, we may be talking that we won't go, but we might end up going. But, you know, the IMF is not our solution. We've gone to the IMF many times. And, you know, usually when we go to the IMF, we bring a little bit more discipline to our finances and the economy stabilizes a little bit. But what needs to happen going forward in terms of translating that into building a more resilient and robust economy, it doesn't happen. We've been doing this for long. We only came out of an IMF program, and suddenly we are clamoring for going back to the IMF. So, in principle, I agree when the finance minister says we shouldn't go to the IMF. But at the same time, he has to tell us that the hard decisions that we need to make to ensure that the economy does well without going to the IMF are done. At the moment, I think there's too much emphasis on the e-levy. But unfortunately, the e-levy doesn't, from where I sit, is not the solution to our current challenges.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Patrick Opoku-Assuming, for those thoughts. So I will do the final round on this, starting with Sticker. And then, okay, let me, Franklin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. So, sorry, I'll start the final round on this from you as we did the first round, and then we'll wrap up this conversation quickly. So you've heard from all the parties involved on this. Finally, ending with Dr. Patrick Opoku Assuming's thoughts on, he seems to say it basically depends on the finance minister cracking the whip on what needs to be done. But the situation is we are between a rock and a hard place. We need to raise revenue. The government also needs to be able to spend something to be able to achieve some of the things that it really wants to do.
You know, one of the things I suspect that could have happened, and probably to convince everybody about the e-levy. And Sika, don't get some of us wrong at all. We are not opposed to raising taxes using tax revenue for development. I think in the current milieu and the contestation over the e-levy.
I didn't get him. Oh no, ask him to.
No. I was just saying that don't get it quite twisted that some of us are against government policy to rein in revenues or at all costs. Not at all. And I'm trying to say that, and I'm tying my comments to Akoto's question. You know, one of the things that would have made it easier for this government to sell the e-levy idea would have been if they have done their own sort of analysis, value for money analysis, to say that the many billions of dollars we invested in initiatives like one district, one factory, one village, one dam, 3 SHS, and all those other interventions that they introduced had yielded some fruits. I think it becomes much less convincing to do when people are being told that, look, this is exactly what we've done with the money we get pumping into these initiatives. And then we would understand that even though the economy had grown from $5 billion in 2000 to almost $65 billion in 2022, which is almost a 13-fold increase. People would have been assured that, look, we're actually making progress. But if every now and then we seem to be scampering and saying, oh, we are not getting enough revenue, we need to do big things, I think for me, the bigger question would have been, how are we assessing the various initiatives of government? Not just this government, the previous governments as well. And I think we need a dispassionate, independent, if you like, non-partisan analysis of that, something we intend to do, by the way. But I think until the government itself has shown enough proof that all these initiatives, like I keep saying, I think the problem with this government, this administration, is that they expended way too much during their first tenure. And unfortunately, when COVID happened, well, we were scampering all over the place. But of course, there's also the contestation that COVID had brought in a lot of revenues anyway. So however you look at it, there's a need to have a dispassionate conversation about the agenda of building the Ghana beyond aid. Let's interrogate the agenda so far. What has happened in the first term? Did we spend money wisely? Were we getting value for money? Why is it that after almost 20 years of growing the economy from $5 billion to 60 billion, we are still having perennial challenges of unemployment? I mean, all the negative growth that we are experiencing, the characteristics that we experience. Why? And I suspect once you're able to answer those questions, maybe the conversations about IMF are actually secondary. You know, last week I told Bernard that we tend to go to the IMF only when we are at our wit's end. But that shouldn't be the case. And IMF should not be seen like some kakai, because to be told, there are various of course, there are various programs that could be assessed on the IMF. And so going to the IMF does not necessarily mean you are going to do an enhanced credit facility program, as we've always done. The 16 times we've been there is only when things have gone so bad. But the IMF has a number of packages. I mean, people have suggested, for instance, the rapid finance instrument could have been another approach, which other countries have utilized anyway. I mean, people say that while the finance minister says the economy is so robust and everything is going well, then there are other packages within the IMF that you could actually approach the IMF and get billions of dollars for. I mean, there are countries that have gone to the IMF not because they were at their wit's end, but also because they wanted to take advantage of the added benefits. So, unfortunately, the conversation now is that, well, if you don't take care, you need to go to the IMF because, as we speak, the twin devils of every government, escalating expenditure and runaway debts, have not left us at all. So we need to have a dispassionate conversation, which conversation we must have devoid of partisan bickering. But of course, you can also not take away the politics, because as I said not too long ago, it is exactly the posture of trying to edge one other party into government, which leads to this cyclical nature of apportioning blame. It's unfortunate that we've done so much, but we are seeing not much at all. So I think that ball goes back to all of us. Of course, we, the independents, we like to call ourselves independent, but we like to see things from our standpoint. But government has the much harder task of convincing everybody that, look, in spite of the billions of dollars we invested in these initiatives in the first term, we got you this. I think the finance minister tried to say something like that. I was almost lamenting why free SHS students were against the e-levy.
Yeah.
That kind of introspection is needed. You need to show people that when you build a dam for 250,000 Ghana cedis, it shouldn't have cost that much. It should have been 30,000. What did you do with the remainder of the money? You see, from that standpoint, this conversation about paying extra tax would have been far, far easier. Because as it's told, nobody likes to pay extra tax when they don't see what necessarily has been the tax has been utilized for. So government communication should not be across purposes. And I think, Sticker, you need to do a hard job of convincing everybody. The numbers you talk about, we all know them. Use it to tell your story. Tell us the story. And let's make sure that the story is being told in a very frank manner to warrant this tax. But as everybody is saying across the table, including Professor Asumi, let's not make it look as if the e-levy is the only panacea. We've had tremendous amount of money, and there's a need to show what the money has been used for.
Thank you. So, Sticker, listening to Franklin, basically, the question he's asking is, you have to show working.
Thank you. I think
You have 6 minutes.
please give me more than that.
You have 6 minutes.
I think
So, show working.
the way Franklin and then the doctor spoke, some of their statements, I agree with them, especially the doctor. Some of them I also have different opinion.
Certainly.
And I also want Franklin to understand that I'm not per what I said meant or meaning they are against government policy. No. This issue about taxation in production that I said probably is being misconstrued by the state, I mean a section of stakeholders, but then please, I think this government demonstrated in the area of education. I didn't know we were doing this, I would have brought them. In the area of health and all the areas, what we have done and achieved. I mean, tangibles, they were there. I mean, I think we need to put them again. I understand, Franklin, probably the communication has not gone down well for people to appreciate. Because if you listen to Franklin, the figures, he did not argue against the figures I gave, or trying to say that in terms of economic parameters, we done better. He said he knows, which means it is a fact. But he went further to say that, okay, show more work with these figures, which I agree with him. So it's the onus is of the government now to let people see, probably speak more to these issues. My brother, we were actually entangled with this IMF stuff. 2016, what happened? With the IMF, what happened? We're growing around 3.2, 3.4 with the IMF. With the IMF, our interest rate jumped back to almost 40%. Our reserve declined in this country. So the IMF is not panacea. It is not a decision to say that Ghana's economy will do well or not. But I'm not also against other people who are saying that, okay, probably for temporarily or in the short term, if you have issues, you can actually go for this temporary short whatever or mitigation. That's their view. But for how long and for how many times countries such as Ghana with all these endowed resources always have to rely on a third body? So if IMF hadn't existed, what would happen to us? I think these are issues.
So why do you contribute to the IMF then? We contribute, right? Because you have to contribute to be able to go for
but
money.
when I'm saying they come with their conditionalities.
I know.
Look what happened when their brothers went for credit, credibility policy, whatever. Between 2012 and 2016. Credibility. Yes, I mean they are commutative anyway. Between 2012 and 2016, what happened? They had to freeze public sector employment. It is a fact. Is that good for us? You think that couldn't have contributed immensely towards, even apart from COVID, probably our GDP issues? Because GDP, of course, apart from what the government is doing in the short term, also has preceding issues. And even he said it, my brother here. So what I'm saying is that with all these things, let us accept the fact that IMF, it is time that, as Kwame Nkrumah said, black man is capable of whatever in own affairs. We try to do things on our own, even when there are crises or when there's crisis. In any case, my brother said that our behavior, but whichever way, our behavior put NHIS back on track. They were taking NHIS back to cash and carry. Whether you have issues with efficiency or effectiveness of free SHS, my brother, but for free SHS, over 100,000 young ones would have been home. This is a fact. About 100,000 teachers have been employed. I was in the same parliament with him when all these figures were churned up and nobody could argue. What we are saying is that we have to understand the times in which we are. One doctor made a very fantastic point that he said, in fact, if I got him right, all the figures that made us go to IMF are the same today. I disagree. Because things that IMF conditional loans, what I qualify you for. One, you talk about monetary and credit aggregates. That is the asset size of the banks. The banks today are far better than we took over. Banks are making about over 100% profit. The industry, go and check. I'm not saying all is well. And that also includes the reserves. The reserves today are better. The only side I agree with him 100% is the fiscal aspect, where he narrated all of them, and it is true 100%. But that aspect, when there is impaired productivity in your country, definitely your fiscal balances and space will have the problems you're having. This is a fact. Nobody can argue about this. The other point that I agree and understand is that how we spend our money as a country, the wastage, the corruption, probably inflating project cost, which is not only MPP and DC. Corruption is a problem in our country. So that aspect, we need to look at, just as Franklin said, it's a national issue. But if you look at this government, what that I'm saying is that even the 1D1F we are talking about, we might not have met our projections, but we've done a lot of them. The facts are there. If you talk about one village, one dam, yes. You talk about social intervention policies, yes. Look, now move from Nsawam to Apija. Now it's straight. Me in my constituency, but for this government, we would have been seeing asphaltic roads and streets. I'm not saying we don't have road challenges in here, so you can send your whatever there to go and check. So what I'm saying is that we have problems in our country emanating from probably Kwame Nkrumah's time. But since we took over, our additions, our improvements or whatever, they are there. But people are failing to realize and take that we live in a country that, okay, they say that good things are written on water and bad ones on rock, probably. Maybe we have also failed to communicate in a way that we have superior debate or get people on our side. They can say whatever. But what I'm saying is that the challenges we have today, nobody can take away from the fact that, remarkably, this COVID has contributed. And that if we want to restore, we want to consolidate, we want to continue, we want to actually make sure that our fiscal balances are at levels that all of us will be happy with, we need to generate revenue domestically. As to whether this option or approach, I agree. But one thing I'm also expecting the experts to come out again and tell us is that they keep on saying, oh, COVID, we got a lot of money. I'm not saying they are lying or it is a fact. But please, why can't they say that we got 1 billion, our obligations within that period was 50%. So where's the money? We cannot keep on making statements, oh, we got more money, but we don't know how much we spent. We don't know what we needed. Are we also talking about the fact that even up to now, workers are being paid in this country, they don't go to work because of COVID? Because institutions run 2-week shift? Are we talking about that? What are we talking about? Even whilst they were home, they were having free water, free electricity at that time? Are we talking about that? Are we still talking about the fact that when it comes to pro-poor policies, redistribution policies, we are having free FKIP implemented, free SHS there, yes, FKIP implemented, free SHS, LEAP, free feeding, I mean all those national health insurance,
okay. The points
all these things are there. Are we also sitting down to analyze the impact on our economy? Are we really doing that? So what I'm saying is that as a country, if we have to be independent economically or socio-economically, we should be able to take the mantle ourselves. We should be able to begin a journey that will always wouldn't have to depend on IMF, external this, external that, because Ghana, we have enough.
All right.
And two, everybody must also change his attitude, his mindset.
Point well made. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Amoah, Member of Parliament for his share. So let me just take a few messages, take another break, and then Suhini comes in, and then that would wrap up this conversation. Then we can talk about journalism and media freedoms and responsibility.
Oh, I agree.
You don't have 1 minute.
I beg, no,
I'm reading messages. No, you don't even have that. No,
I'm just begging you. I want to ask this. What I want to ask
Are you
is
asking
that,
me?
yes, I want to say that if they say, especially my brother says that
he has hijacked and gotten 1 minute.
Please.
He hasn't said
Intimidation
anything.
tactics.
I wanted to. You said you have a question.
Osafo Mafu said.
No. Time is past. No.
So you don't let me speak.
No, time is past.
So I should go. So I'm done. You can let me go. Now I have to go to the airport.
Yes.
Thank you, and give the time to him. Because if I come to your show, I'm begging for just something, so you know, let me talk. What's the meaning of that?
Let me just take a message.
Because if somebody says strong or weak economy, You are here. We should
Can you imagine? He's getting
facts
it all.
and
I'm
figures
surprised.
should be pulled out for us to
F4,
analyze.
goodness.
If it's weak, the facts are there. If it's strong, the facts are there.
Honorable Shaz, you out of.
Oh, you don't get my point.
Dr. Sidomo, you're out of order. Wait for me. Don't go yet. F4 Africa Godo from Mafidove says the government.
Can I go?
Just wait a second.
Yes, sir.
Has failed Ghanaians and they are frustrated.
Even the
Godfred, if the NDC thinks the e-levy is draconian and insensitive, the most strategic thing to do is to allow people to implement so that if it fails, they can use it to oust them in the next election. I don't really understand the NDC on this matter. Seth Kwame from Castle says after putting all the blame on COVID and telling us to be honest, he failed to honestly tell Ghanaians that they also received huge sums of money from the IMF because of COVID. See the hypocrisy. Peter Mayer Hyde says, why is Dr. Amwa not telling us what and how they use the free money from the donor organizations in the COVID fund? Was it mentioned in the budget? Has it been accounted for? If COVID brought hardship, it also brought a lot of free money, both from COVID fund they launched and donors. Is that free money finished? Alan Enchantan says, my simple question is, what happened to those lawyers and other big professionals who do not pay taxes and were supposed to receive friendly phone calls from GRA as promised by the president himself? Martin Ashama from says, the whole e-levy thing is like buying watches from the watches seller and the seller's landowner comes to demand money from you. It doesn't make sense. Emmanuel from Musu says, Godfred and panel, please, the government says they will give proper accounts on the use of the e-levy when granted. I have a little question. We have been paying toll recovery levy. Only God knows how long we have been paying it for. Have you ever had the government account for it before? For us to know the amounts left to be paid? This roadshow by the government won't wash. Were we consulted when government was implementing the free SHS and other things? Prince Henry again says, government is telling Ghanaians to tighten our belts and pay killer e-levy, but the president is still enjoying himself. That's what our priorities, Nana Akufo-Addo. We'll take a quick break when we return. So he wraps up the e-levy conversation and then we move to talk about our own space, the media space.